The hardest battle you will ever fight has no witnesses, no crowd, no referee, no one to tell you when it is over. It begins on an ordinary morning, in an ordinary room, with an ordinary face staring back at you from a mirror, and something behind the eyes that has gone quiet, not peaceful. Quiet the way a fire goes quiet when the last of the wood has been consumed. You know the feeling. You have been there. Maybe you are there right now. This is the story of that war. The one inside. The one that leaves no visible wounds and yet can hollow a person out more completely than any external catastrophe ever could. The one that begins not with a single catastrophic event, but with a slow accumulation of mornings, each one slightly heavier than the last, until the weight becomes so familiar you stop noticing it is there. You simply carry it. You learn to walk bent. There was a man, let us call him simply a man, because he is every man, and perhaps he is you, who woke one morning and could not remember why he used to rise with purpose. He lay on the same mattress he had slept on 4 years, in the same room, with the same ceiling crack running above his head like a river that never moved. Outside, the city was already grinding forward, doors slamming, engines turning, children being called to breakfast by mothers who had not yet given up on the morning. The world did not wait. The world never waited. But he lay there, and the weight on his chest was not sorrow exactly. It was heavier than sorrow. It was the accumulated silence of every morning he had promised himself that today would be different. And it had not been. He counted those promises once. He stopped counting. He had not always been this way. Once, he was the one who rose before the sun, who believed that effort was its own reward, who told younger men to keep going, that the road opens eventually. He had said those words with the confidence of someone who had not yet been truly tested. Life has a way of waiting for that moment. It finds the precise hour when your confidence has grown large enough to be worth breaking. And then it moves, not dramatically, not with warning, simply, quietly, consistently, the way water moves against stone. You do not see the erosion happening. You only discover one day that something solid has become hollow. He had built things once, not great things, not monuments or legacies that strangers would remark upon, but real things. A discipline that got him out of bed before the rest of the house stirred. A habit of reading that made him feel connected to something larger than his own small life. A practice of writing down what he wanted, not what he feared, but what he genuinely wanted, and working backward from that image to find the path. He had been someone who believed in the path, who trusted that walking it faithfully would lead somewhere worth arriving. But paths demand patience, and patience, when it goes unrewarded long enough, begins to feel indistinguishable from foolishness. The first thing that goes is not energy. It is not even hope. The first thing that goes is the ability to imagine yourself differently. He could no longer picture who he was trying to become. The vision had faded the way old photographs fade, slowly, then completely, until you are not sure what the original colors were. He had wanted things once, real things, a life built by his own hands, a name earned through patience, a quiet pride that belonged to no one but him. But wanting had cost him, trying had cost him, and somewhere in the accumulation of small failures and invisible wounds, he had made a private agreement with himself, an agreement he was ashamed of, but could not undo. That perhaps this was simply who he was, that some men are made for greatness, and some men are made to watch greatness from a distance, and perhaps the kindest thing he could do for himself was to stop pretending otherwise. That agreement is the most dangerous contract a human soul can sign. He began to avoid mirrors, not because he disliked his face, but because looking directly at himself required an honesty he could not afford. Avoidance is a language the defeated speak fluently. He avoided the journals he once kept, their blank pages, now an accusation, than an invitation. Avoided the books stacked by the wall, their spines facing him or a row of closed doors. Avoided the friends who still believed in him, because their belief felt like a debt he could not repay, a kindness he had not earned and could not honor. He became skilled at presence without participation, sitting in rooms, nodding at the right times, laughing at the right moments, contributing just enough to avoid being noticed as absent, while something essential in him stood behind a closed door and watched, and waited, for what? He no longer knew. This is how a person disappears without leaving the room. The days arranged themselves into a pattern that asked nothing of him. He moved through them carefully, choosing only what was safe, only what was familiar, only what carried no risk of further disappointment. Safety became his architecture. He built a life out of small predictable walls, and he lived inside them, and he called it stability. But it was not stability. It was hiding, and somewhere below the surface of that carefully managed life, something that had once been alive was pressing against the walls, trying to remind him of its existence, growing weaker with each passing season. But here is what no one tells you about the war inside. The enemy you are fighting is not laziness. It is not weakness. It is not even fear, though fear walks beside it everywhere. The enemy is the version of yourself that has learned to feel safe in smallness. That version is not stupid. It is not malicious. It is simply terrified. And it is intelligent in its terror. It knows your exact arguments. It has memorized your past failures and can recite them quietly in your ear at precisely the moment you are about to move. It has catalogued every time you tried and fell short, every time you believed and were disappointed, every door you walked toward with hope and found locked. It keeps those memories ready, not to harm you, but to protect you, because it genuinely believes that the pain of trying is greater than the pain of staying still. It does not shout, it whispers, and it wears your voice. That is what makes it so difficult to fight. You cannot argue with a voice that sounds like your own. You cannot call it a liar when it quotes your own history back to you. So instead, most people negotiate with it. They make small concessions. Tomorrow instead of today. Next month instead of this one. When the conditions are better. When I am more ready. When the fear is smaller. And the voice agrees pleasantly to each postponement. Because postponement is its native country. It was born there. It lives there. And every day you spend inside it, the walls grow a little more familiar and the outside world grows a little more strange. There were nights he sat alone at the edge of his bed and felt the weight of the unlived life pressing against his ribs like something physical. Not regret for what had happened to him, regret for what had not happened, for the words not spoken when speaking would have changed everything, for the mornings wasted in the luxury of paralysis, for the door he had seen clearly, had stood in front of with his hand nearly raised, and had chosen not to open, because opening it meant he might fail, and failing meant he would have to know, really know, what he was made of, and that knowledge, he had decided somewhere along the way, was too dangerous to seek. It is a strange and particular cruelty, that the fear of discovering your limits can imprison you more completely than the limits themselves. He had a neighbor, an old man with slow hands and a bent back, who spent each morning in his small garden, tending what little grew there. It was not a beautiful garden. The soil was dry. The seasons had not been kind. Some years, very little came of it. But the old man returned every morning regardless, kneeling with difficulty, rising with effort, working with the deliberate calm of someone who had long since stopped asking for guarantees. The younger man had seen him lose a harvest to bad weather and return the following spring without apparent bitterness, had seen him tend plants that did not survive and replant the same soil the following week, had seen him work through heat that made younger men retreat indoors, moving slowly but moving, the way rivers move in dry seasons, reduced but not stopped. The younger man watched him from the window sometimes. He did not yet understand what he was watching. He thought he was watching stubbornness. He thought he was watching an old man to set in his ways to acknowledge futility. He was watching something else entirely. He was watching what it looks like when a person has made a fundamental decision about who they are going to be, and then simply lives that decision every day without drama, without audience, without waiting for the conditions to become more favorable. He was watching the only form of courage that actually sustains a life, not the loud courage of single dramatic moments, but the quiet courage of return. The courage that comes back the next morning and the morning after that. Not because success is certain, but because showing up is the only answer worth giving to the silence. The younger man did not understand this yet, but something in him was beginning to. Because that is how transformation works in real life. Not like lightning, but like the slow return of feeling to a limb that has been numb. First a faint tingling, then discomfort, then the painful, necessary awareness of what was lost and what remains. It is not a pleasant process. The return of feeling hurts more than the numbness did, but it is the only direction that leads somewhere worth going. He began to notice small things. The way the early morning light moved differently from the afternoon light. The way certain music reached something in him that he had thought was no longer reachable. The way a conversation with someone genuinely alive in their own purpose made him feel. Simultaneously, the ache of his own dormancy and the memory of what it felt like to not be dormant. These were not signs of recovery. They were signs of waking. And waking, before it becomes anything else, is first simply the painful awareness of how long you have been asleep. He started to ask himself a question. Not a grand question. Not a question about destiny or legacy or what the world needed from him. A smaller question. An almost embarrassingly simple question. The kind of question that only feels simple until you try to answer it honestly. What would I do tomorrow morning if I were not afraid of it not working? Not what should I do? Not what ought I do? What would I do? The real me. The one that existed before the voice learned to be so persuasive. What would that person do with a morning that was genuinely free? The answer came slowly. Then it came clearly. And it was not impressive. It was not a revelation. It was not a grand vision of a transformed life. It was one small action. One unremarkable beginning. One thread pulled from the tangle that led, if he followed it faithfully, to the next thread and the next, until slowly the pattern became visible again. The turning does not come like thunder. That is the lie the stories tell, because thunder is dramatic and stories love drama. But real turning, the kind that lasts, the kind that is built into the foundation of a life rather than painted across its surface, that kind comes quietly. It comes the way light returns at the end of a long night, not suddenly, but gradually, almost imperceptibly, until you realize you can see again without knowing exactly when the darkness lifted. You cannot point to the moment. You can only look back from a distance and notice that something has changed. For him, the turning came on a morning, all of the other mornings. Same ceiling, same room, same crack in the plaster running its familiar course overhead. Same city outside waking without waiting for him. But something in him, some exhausted and stubborn fragment that had refused, through all of it, to fully surrender, that had kept a single small fire going through the longest nights, asked not a grand question, but a quiet one. What if the version of you that you are afraid to become is not impossible, but simply unbegun? Not what if you succeed, not what if it is easy, not what if the world recognizes what it cost you. Simply, what if you begin? What if the only real distance between who you are and who you were made to be is not talent, not time, not the weight of what you have been through, but one morning, one act of quiet defiance against the voice that has been speaking for too long inside your own skull? What if the war is not won by force or by certainty or by the sudden appearance of perfect conditions, but by the patient, daily, unglamorous refusal to abandon the field? He rose, not with fire, not with certainty, not with the feeling that everything would now be different, because that feeling is not trustworthy, and he had learned, at great cost, not to require it. He rose with something smaller and more durable than feeling. He rose with a decision, fragile as a seed, just as alive, requiring the same faithfulness that the old man showed his garden every morning in every season, regardless of what the sky promised. He rose with the decision to stop being his own enemy. That is not the end of the story. That is the beginning of it. The real story, the one worth telling, the one that costs something, the one that cannot be skipped or rushed or borrowed from someone else, begins exactly there, Not at the triumph, not at the moment others take notice, not when the results finally arrive and justify the effort. At the turning, at the moment a person looks honestly at the version of themselves that has made peace with smallness, that has signed the agreement, that has built the walls and called them home, and says, without drama, without guarantee, with the full clear weight of everything it will require, not today. The ceiling crack was still there. The room had not changed. The old man next door was already in his garden. The city outside had not paused to mark the occasion, but he had changed. And in the war that no one sees, in the battle that leaves no visible wounds, in the long and private conflict between who you are and who you are capable of being, that quiet, unremarkable, unglamorous change, not a small thing. It is everything.